how do we start? What's a good transition into
Hey,
that?
hi.
Hey,
We're Proteus Debate Academy. I'm Sasan.
I'm Paul.
We didn't rehearse that, but that was good.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're here to do a Q&A. So we asked some people to send us some questions about various debate-related things, or just about us. And I think one person asked us a question about us. Thanks, Tanya.
They're our
Uh,
only real fan.
yeah. Everybody else
Them and
just
Dick
wants
Fed.
free coaching.
Yeah.
Um, If you want to ask us questions for the next Q&A, just put your question in these comments, and then we'll next time, right? And that's cyclical. We don't have to keep making Q&A announcement videos. Okay,
Yeah.
clearly it's
I,
not
I
as
made a,
clever as I thought it
I,
was. I
I,
thought you would have
I
a
made
reaction to that.
I made a post about this. Kind of. So when you made your video on the wall and whatnot, and I shared it on Reddit, and I shared it and I commented and I was like, "Hey, I usually try not to share our stuff on Reddit because I don't want y'all to be inundated and it to seem like we're just all about us or whatever." But Sasan made this really good video, completely independent of me, and I thought it was really good, so I shared it. And someone was like, "No, please share it. We want more of your stuff." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool." But then like anytime we like ask like, "Hey, does anyone want anything specific?" They're like,
Yeah.
just deers in the headlights,
Well, I
which is
mean, I think
fine,
there's a
but it's just
very
really funny to me.
I mean, this is going to set the tone for the Q&A really well. I think there is a very small subset of debaters who, I don't want to say are able to, who formulate specific questions. I think
Yeah.
there's a very narrow uh, like section of the community that is able to like examine what is happening enough to ask a specific question. Um,
Part of the problem, I think, in that regard, is definitely that, like, I mean, there's a phrase I've heard for it, which is like, too dumb to know who's stupid or
Dunning
whatever, right?
Kruger
And I'm
effect.
not, well, but like I'm kind of, but like more. I guess my thought is just like, if you're a new person, very new, you probably have no idea who Proteus Academy is or that
Well,
we
you don't know
exist,
what you
right?
don't know. Also,
Well,
so
but like
yeah,
yes, exactly right. But that's the next level for me is like you know that we exist, but you don't know what you don't know.
yeah,
So like each hard to ask questions, or you ask bad questions, which is fine. Like well, I answered like that's another thing too. I think people are afraid of asking questions that are like bad or whatever. But it's like we're both educators for a living.
yeah. I
Like
don't know.
that is
People
a
don't
sig-
want to seem like they don't
yeah.
understand something. The other thing
But then
is,
the
I think,
I was
please.
I was gonna say the last load of level is people who like think they're good enough
Hmm.
and like Proteus. Like they just think it's fun or whatever it is, right? And so it's like those people aren't interested in asking questions. So it's a very small section, I think, like you're saying, of people who can formulate a question, who have questions, who know
Yeah,
enough to ask the questions that
but
matter.
I think another aspect of it is that I think a lot of the debate community thinks that the way you get better at debate is you do drills. Like on the subreddit, you see people asking like, "What drills should I do?" Or like,
I've
"How
stopped
should
even linking.
how
I've
should
literally stopped even linking. I used to go into every one of those threads and I'm like, here is
the video with every
the
drill?"
video we've made of every drill. Here is a link to the
But
thread
the
where this has
issue
been
isn't the
covered.
drills, right? This one kid was like, "How do I improve? I keep like not breaking or whatever." So I was like, "Well, what are your judges saying?" And the response was, "Oh, something about like my links or whatever." And I was like, "Can you send me an actual ballot?" And not on the subreddit, but privately, he sent me like, "Hey, here's a ballot that I got." And I was like, "The issue isn't like the issue is how you're fundamentally thinking about the K, is like not how this judge or I would think about the K. It's not like, oh, just say this, like add this line, emphasize this part more, or do this drill. It's like your understanding of this debate concept is incomplete. And I think a lot of debaters take it for granted that they just understand debate properly. And at that point, they're like, well, why isn't it working? Or like, do I just need to do more drills? Like,
I was gonna message you about this morning because I was talking to the kids about it yesterday at the tournament, and
mm,
I was talking to Dominic about it, and I kind of forget that like, so at Pacific, the way everything is set up is every Thursday you have 3 debate rounds. Sometimes you debate Tuesday, sometimes you debate Wednesday. So that's like a standard week every week. And I was at Pacific for 3 years. So I did approximately, not counting nationals or anything else, 300 practice rounds. And then on top of that, I competed in official competition, like national circuit stuff, in 200 rounds.
Yeah.
So I have 500 rounds of debating and another almost 100 or so of judging, right?
Yeah.
And that's all one format, like ignoring
The
LD,
rounds
ignoring
you've
all that other stuff.
watched on top of that.
Yeah, and all the rounds, right? And so, like, I think for me, it just intuitively makes sense that, like, no, you have to, like, practice debate, not practice like the skill stuff. I don't think that you should do that in practice at all. I think that's on your own time. I think that when you're working on you or whatever, or when you're in an office hour with a coach or something, if you have those, like that's when you work on drill stuff. Like I used to work on drills in the car. That's how I knew that I was going to do them, because whenever I was in a car, I was doing drills and blah 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 blah, right? But like you have to debate, because if you do
Well,
500 rounds, you're going to see a ton of Ks, a ton of Ts, a ton of disads, a ton of link stories. And if you do it in front of a coach, you're gonna get a ton of feedback. But
well, and
like
the
you can only
most
get so
important
far just saying words fast and clean.
and the most important part of that is developing round vision, which
Mm-hmm.
is the most useful thing in is the most useful skill to have in a debate, and it's
It's just
the
pattern
hardest to
recognition,
develop.
though.
Yeah, it's just pattern
You know what I
recognition.
mean? Like people don't get that like improving at almost everything is recognizing the successful habits and patterns that lead to the outcome that is desired.
Yeah,
And like
yeah.
that's,
I
you can't
mean,
teach that without doing it. You know what I mean? Like it is literally, I tell me if you believe this. Sorry to cut you off, but
no.
I think it's literally impossible to teach someone round vision, even with my favorite round vision drills, unless they do 100 or so debate rounds.
Yeah, I
Like you're just
agree.
not going to
I
get it. It's
agree.
like
And
a
the
pumpkin.
analogy I was gonna say is like fighting games and stuff like that, which we'll talk more about this separately. But I
As we always
followed
do.
this YouTube channel that basically talks about like martial arts, like MMA and boxing, but like basically in fighting game terms. It's awesome.
That sounds
Um,
super cool. I'd love to hear about that.
yeah, but yeah, like in fighting games, like it's not at the highest level. Yes, it's about like how good are you at frame per second analysis and perfect combos and twitch reflexes and stuff like that, right? But that only represents like the best people against the best people. The vast
That's the difference
majority,
maker, the final difference maker.
right, exactly. But the vast majority of why some people are better than others is just pattern recognition. Like, oh, when you get hit, you always roll this way. And there's nothing you can do about that habit in the 2 minutes that you and I are having this fight. So I'll just adapt to that, and there's nothing they can do, right? Like, Rami is a way better Smash Bros. Player than me, but I was like, every time you approach, you jump. So I just have to jump also and know that you're going to be there and get attacked. Anyway, that's pattern recognition is massive, and the only way to develop pattern recognition is to just be in a lot of rounds. Um, let's get to the first question. We're probably going to have to edit this pretty heavily. All right. First question that we're going to talk about is from Krish Narotam. Oh, if I get any of your names wrong in this video, then you have my permission to forever call me Susan. Susan Kasravi. Plenty of
Paula
people.
Viala.
Yeah, Paula Viala. Okay, so the question is tips on not forgetting things to say in speech. I've done a lot of speech redos, and my partner and I go over my speech during prep, but I still run into problems of forgetting. Any tips on how to do that? I do PF, not that debate style, blah 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 blah. That's the first question, and then there's another subset of that. So
Give me the very beginning part of that. I heard the part
not
about
forgetting
not
things to
forget.
say in your speech. So you're getting
Okay,
ready
I
to
thought I
go
heard a
up.
do-over. I thought I heard the word do-over or something.
Yeah,
I
he
didn't
was
know.
saying
Okay,
what he does in practice
got it.
currently. So
Okay.
you can start with this, and I'll chime in.
So number one, in my mind, the first thing I think when I hear this question is, what speech are you? Right? Because it's from what they're describing, they're a PF debater, which is an evidentiary format of debate. And in evidentiary debate, you virtually always can just read a script if you are using your prep time effectively. Obviously, if you're the first speaker, like that shouldn't even
That's
be.
a college thing, dude. They don't do that.
Yeah.
Because they don't
So
give speech docs. Because they don't give
mhm,
speech docs, they
that's
don't
fair.
write out everything. But explain that a little bit.
So for the record, so we when we got our guts stomped out at the tab and dab, just God, the level of competition. When that happened, we set it up ideally so that I was going second, and we were at, or we ended up being half ground, but we just picked second because we thought it was broken. But the reason we did that is because it functionally meant that I had, like, I think we said it was 16 minutes or
Something
something, some
crazy.
crazy amount of time to just cut answers to whatever was said. And every single speech, the second prep time was over, I was sending a full doc to the other team of every single card I was going to read. And beyond that, I was typing up my analytics on things I didn't have cards for. Like, I had that much time to get it done. And so I knew what I was going to say. Now, you can't do that. You're not used to doing that. You can practice it. You can do a bunch of stuff, whatever. That's fine. Ignoring that, our background primarily has often, or not often, has always been in
Parley.
parliamentary debate, and that's all there is in parley, right? Like, you're speaking sort of off the cuff. But even in parley, when I was the MG, which I was for my senior year, I had a one sheet that I would have pre-done before the round. I'd write it up and all that stuff. That just was the four most common things I thought would happen in any debate, which in parley was answers to topicality, answers to the critique, uh, thumpers for politics and econ and hedge or elections, whatever it might be. And then the last one was topic specific thumpers. So, like, arguments that I thought I might come up on this specific topic that are relevant. And so I've recently been teaching this to some of our students at DVC, and one of them the other day, they did their first tournament with it, and they were literally like, I cannot believe how easy the MG is when you already wrote your answers ahead of time and they just happen to read the thing. And I'm like, this is the reality, though. And this is, like, I guess, the real answer to your question. It's not luck that they just happened to read the position you wrote answers to. If you are doing effective preparation, you should not really be coming across positions that you don't expect. Even in Parley, where you get a topic in 20 minutes to prepare for it. When we had like a month or whatever to prepare for this PF tournament, we spent the first 2 weeks just talking about it. Like, we didn't write a single word down until I think 5 days out from the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And then most of the work got done in the last 2 days. And then I think during the entire tournament, other than like the weird like meme shit kids were reading, there was one position someone read that we didn't immediately have an answer for, and it was fine because we just answered it with analytics.
Yeah.
And so
So
it's prep.
so here's, I think, a more basic answer to that, which is like less, okay, be really good at debate, predict what people are going to say, and write out your answers, which people are
That's
often
not my answer to every question. It's just
be
be
good
better.
at debate.
Okay.
The answer
Sorry.
that I always give, especially in Parley, is you should be reading your speech off of a script. Meaning, when you're listening to your opponent, who you're going to be responding to, and you're flowing what they're saying, you need to already be flowing your answers. And if you're not fast enough where you can write down everything they said and all of your responses, your priority should be the responses. All the time in Parley, you see people who have a perfect flow of what their opponent said, but no answer scripted. They're like, I'll just make it up when I get up there. So then they get up there and they're like, okay, next on disadvantage 2, on the uniqueness, they said that right now the economy is doing good, but okay, yeah, and in uniqueness 2, they said, like, they just move on, right? And that does nothing for you. The fact that you wrote down what they said but don't have a response doesn't get you any closer to winning the round. And it's better to have a response and maybe miss some things they said than to have a perfect record of what they said and nothing to say yourself. So, while they're speaking, you need to be writing down what you're saying, and if you need to take some prep time to add some more stuff, that's what you need to do. But you're just going to forget. You're going to have all these ideas for what you're going to say in the next speech, and you're going to get up there and you're going to forget. And what you need to be doing in both what I'm talking about and what Paul was talking about a second ago is you need to be following a script, following bullet points on your flow for what you talk about next. Otherwise, there's just no way to, in that moment, have better recall and better whatever. Maybe as you get better, that will come, but there's just, it's an enormously uphill battle that you don't need to be fighting. The second part of the question is, and y'all should try to do an overview on like overarching problems with rounds and like parallel with like the small details. The way teams can like apply the bigger picture ideas. Yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely talk about like common overarching, similar to Paul, you were talking about like these things happen in debate rounds, prepare for them, and just be ready for what to say. I think we can talk about overarching like issues that come up, but I think that'd be a little hard for us to do in PF right now because I haven't watched that. Every public forum round I've watched except like 2 in person has been recorded and is on our channel, so you can watch that. And if I mention some things that were common there, that's probably the best way. But I don't know that Paul or I are like in tune with the activity enough to kind of speak on its trends.
I think I'd agree with that. I mean, I'm not following the topic at all right now. I have no interest in it. I don't have what's it, I guess a horse in that race, I think is the expression.
Yeah,
And so
I teach an elementary school debate class, and my work asked me to write a case, and I wrote like a 400-word case off the top of my head, and it's just like super simple stuff. Like one of them's just essential workers need sick days and medicine, and the other side is like we need vaccines and we need profit margins for there to be vaccine research. But I don't know, I think that'll be effective. I think people overthink public forum a lot. I think, okay, I'll say this. I think one of the overarching problems that I'm seeing, not so much in rounds, but in how people are preparing for public forum debate rounds, is that they're trying to go for too many arguments and they're making their story really complicated, and they're not really sure how to approach the round, and things get dropped and the rounds get messy. At the end of the day, you need to win one argument to win a debate round, if you can prove that argument's the most important thing. And I would like to see more. Obviously, the best teams are going to have more than one argument because it's more strategic. But before you get there, I would like to see more debaters just going in with one main argument, one main impact, one main strategy, and just trying to win that. And once you can do that, that's when you go for 2 arguments, because then you become what Rocky's trainer Mickey calls a very dangerous poison, which is you could win on either one in any round, and you just make it so that your opponent, you just go for whichever your opponent handled most poorly. So your opponent needs to do twice the amount of work to be able to beat you. But before you're there, you need to be able to pick a position and win. And I'm not seeing a lot of that in public forum right now. From what I see of people who ask us and talk about how they're prepping and so on. Next question.
well, I would just one thing I would touch on that is I would note that a trend I don't like in public forum that I see in public forum a lot, like it's almost a fascination, is I don't like debates that run away from the core of the topic. Like I think you should have like the most topical path. Like what is the topic actually supposed to be about? And largely the most topical neg. But it seems like every public forum team is hoping to find some random card that lets them read something that no one else expects, and because they don't disclose, they get to win by doing it, which I think is bad. because you're like the reason that that thing isn't discussed broadly in the literature is because it's not true, like
Or
almost
like
always.
useful.
Or yeah, and
It's
so
not
I
just
just wish.
that. I'm seeing people in like talking about LD who are like running counter plans on compulsory voting. And they're like, let's do a lottery where we randomly choose who gets to vote, and then they have to do compulsory voting. Which, like,
No one is advocating for first
no
off.
one's advocating for, but also it's the F. The resolution doesn't say like the United States federal government should make voting compulsory for every eligible citizen. Actually, maybe it does say that, but I don't know. Technically, you can be an affirmative and say one dude has to vote. Okay. Another Lynn wants to know, when it comes to cross-ex and debate, why is it bad to answer lengthily? Could it not strengthen the case?
Oh, do you want me to take that one first?
I feel like I just spoke, so I mean I know my
Okay.
answer,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I just know that you're big on cross X. So yeah, from my perspective, well, number one, as a judge, I view it as like weak. It generally long answers from teams are not because they have so much dope stuff to talk about and so much nuance and depth. They're just trying to obfuscate. They're trying to hide the fact. They're not trying to answer the argument directly, right?
mm-hmm.
And that doesn't look great to me. It makes me start questioning and thinking about like what is this thing that is being asked about. Um, I also think that arguing in cross-ex is dumb. Like I just don't think it comes off great. I don't think that's what cross-ex is for. Like as we said a number of times, cross-ex is just about looking smarter than your opponent, like looking like you know more about the debate than your opponent. I think the best cross-ex interaction I've seen in years, maybe ever. There's this round with can't remember his name right now, wiki debater, and he's debating this kid, and the kid asked him a question, and or sorry, he asked this kid a question, and he's like, "So what would you say if I said this, like if I brought this up or whatever, right?" And the other kid goes this kind of roundabout way. It's like, well, blah, blah, blah. Like, I mean, that's a good argument. You should make it. And the other kid just goes, "I'm glad you think it's a good argument. I will." And like that was basically all he needed during that whole crosstalk. And I'm like, oh, this kid's doomed. And then that kid went on 3-0. And it's like
Yeah.
this kid just tried to like weasel his way out of this thing. And ultimately, it always seems like those long ass statements end in, "Well, like, why don't you make the argument then?" And it's like, okay, I will. It just seems like posturing. I'm not into it.
Yeah, so the first answer is when you're answering a question in a really roundabout way, it definitely isn't as like you're not you're less likely to be perceived as like dominant in the round as when you give a really clear, straightforward answer. I think that's more effective. Now, you're kind of touching on the only instances where you do want to give longer answers, which is when you want to strengthen your case. Whereas where you can say, I'm glad you asked. Let me explain this other thing and burn all of your cross-ex time. But the first reason we don't do that is because of what Paul just talked about, where rarely are you really just elaborating on your case, and that only applies in two scenarios. One is where you didn't set up your case well enough, where that all the information's already out. And two is when your opponent asks a super softball, easy question that allows you to talk about your stuff. And in both of those scenarios, we're assuming bad debaters. And I think when you're trying to get good at debate, you have to assume opponents are good at debate when you're practicing, when you're strategizing. Because if someone's bad at debate, you're going to beat them anyway, right? You don't need to practice to beat someone at debate who's worse than you. You need to practice to beat someone who's similar to your level or maybe even slightly better in a given scenario. So always assume your opponents are going to be as good as possible. The second reason you don't want to do that in public forum, you don't say specifically that this is about PF, but the reason you wouldn't want to do that in public forum is because
But this is a great point. I
you're
already know where you're
burning your
going.
own time to ask
Yeah.
questions, which is like you're not going to be able to do very much damage to them, very likely, by answering their question, but you're probably going to do a lot of damage by asking the right question. And you want to free up as much time for it to be your turn to ask questions as possible.
The last thing I would note in LD is that for me, I literally did not care about cross-ex from like a looking stronger perspective because I almost always in these rounds, 'cause I didn't compete like on the national circuit very much in LD. Like I was pretty much universally in a round gonna be the better debater and already be perceived as it because of my success in other events or whatever. And I just wanted to prep. And so if you gave a long-winded question or answer rather, it was my dream
Yeah.
because I just sat there prepping, not even listening to what you were saying the whole time, and I didn't have to think of another question. If people just answer your questions really short, you're gonna look bad if you don't have another question ready to go, and you're gonna have to keep thinking of questions. When people
Yeah.
would just go like 2 minutes, I'm like, yeah, what? I would actually, in fact, my move in cross-ex was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And then when they like get upset about it, I'm like, great,
Yeah, it's free
prep.
prep. How much time should serious debaters try to set aside for practice/prep? Can I go first on this one?
Please do.
I think Paul is going to have some answer that's better informed than mine on, okay, at the end of the day, here's how much time I put in, here's how much time other debaters on my team put in, and here's how much time like this person I know of put in, and maybe like something around this might be reasonable. But I think there's a underlying assumption, not an assumption, premise in the question that I see really pervasively throughout debate, throughout various topics, especially with younger people that I work with. So I want to speak to that, and then I can turn it to Paul to actually talk about the number of hours. And that is, I think it comes from like our school system where it's like, hey, like in order to get an A, you need to do this amount of work. And people are like, well, what do I need to do to get an A in debate? What do I need to do to be good in debate? But what people don't account for is that debate is a competitive activity. And yes, there's practicing well versus not practicing well, but you're never going to get a number, right? It depends, one, on how much success you're trying to have, right? Like a serious debater, you're trying to be the best in the country, or you're trying to be best at some local tournament. Like what does that mean to you? And two, assuming you're getting the same amount of effectiveness out of your practice as your opponents, you just need to practice more than them. I have no way of telling you one strict number, because even if you decide, okay, my number is 20 hours a week and somebody's dead set on beating you, they'll do 23 hours a week and they'll beat you, right? So it's a competitive, comparative thing where you need to just prep better, do practice better, work harder than whoever you're going against. And in forensics, at least in college forensics, which is what all of you should do if you have the opportunity to do it, generally speaking, the harder working team wins. And that's especially true for like at the basic level of who breaks and who doesn't. I mean, if you just mapped out how much time people put into the activity, the upper half breaks and the lower half doesn't. So that's kind of the premise that I want to touch on, right? Like how much time should a serious debater put in will depend on who they're trying to beat and how much time that person is putting in, which isn't a question I can answer directly. But Paul, I don't want to presume what your answer is, but
So I had really two answers. The first one is exactly what you said, which is more than the other person or more effectively than the other person in a lesser amount of time, and that's also dependent on your like level of like talent, which is
can
like
I
natural skill, but also ability to learn.
right,
So
and
go
I
ahead.
just
Yeah.
real quick want to touch on something that we talked about before the Q&A properly started, and I don't know if we've left it in the edit or not, which is that a lot of debaters, a lot of young debaters, will focus their practice on doing drills, where really the reason they're not winning isn't that they haven't drilled something enough. It's that their understanding of the K or their overall strategy is like not that good, right? So no amount of just drilling or practicing or reading or researching is going to fix those things. So it's not just about time. It's about what are your weaknesses and are you effectively addressing those. Back to Paul though.
Um, what I was gonna say is that I think it's really really hard for me to give you any meaningful number. And to quote Tyler One, famed League of Legends streamer, I'm just built different, just built freaky. And what I mean by that is today, so I'm a debate coach, and we just had some garbage tournament this weekend. Like not like
That's
it was a
not
warm up.
nice.
It was well, I don't mean like to. I mean because
No one
it
would call it a competitive tournament. It's
yeah
four
it wasn't a
prelim rounds
competitive.
and no elims.
Yeah, for prelim, it's not intended to be, right. It's a warm up.
Right.
It's just, and to me that's a garbage tournament. Whatever, right?
It's a
running
throwaway little
yeah,
nice
the
tournament.
running of the tournament was fine. The people there were pleasant. All
They're
that
my
good
friends. Don't say.
yeah, no, they're great people. All that good
Yeah.
I mean, I like these people too. I'm just saying, like the tournament itself, it's not had nothing to do with them.
Sure.
It just wasn't a very good tournament, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. You know, I'm used to different tournaments. But what I was going to say on the subject is that it's some garbage tournament that doesn't matter at all, for me, in my mind, for my goals. Let me put it that way. For my goals, it mattered not at all. For
Yeah.
where I want the kids to be, but I just want them getting in reps. They wanted to go, whatever. With that said, I woke up this morning at 4:45 and ended up not being able to go back to sleep. And from like probably 5 a.m. until 6:50, I was just thinking about debate. And like, I don't think you're like that person
Wow.
watching the video for the most part. Like, and when it was nationals, Sasan talked to me about this when he went to Fire Up High, which is like a whole, you know, it's nationals, but it's a whole different beast than like the NPT or the NPDA after 15 practice rounds in the last 5 days and all that stuff, right? But when I was at nationals, I could not think about debate. Like when it's national season, that's it. I wake up and I'm prepping a case in my head. I go to sleep and I'm prepping a case in my head. I'm talking to friends and I'm thinking about debate. That's all there is.
Yeah.
There's nothing but that. If I'm not drilling, it's the same thing. If I am drilling, it's the same thing. And I don't compete anymore, so I don't drill at all.
Every year after nationals, I wake up for a week. Every day for a week, I'll wake up preparing a debate case in my head.
Last night, I literally, part of going to sleep, I was just like, I never won a national championship, and I'm still upset about it. And that's just like how I live, years removed from my career, and like as someone who had a lot of success in the activity. And so for me, I just was one of those people who was just practicing. I wanted to practice minimum every single day, ignoring the actual practice at Pacific. Like Pacific had practice 3 days a week, and I was practicing outside of that every single day, whether that was writing cases, doing drills, talking to people about debate, all of that kind of stuff. And I know people who had significantly less success than me in debate who practiced way more, right? Who just constantly like did drills and stuff, but for some reason, because of my I don't know, identification of how the event works or whatever, I was better. Conversely, like I think about Tom Cady and Henry Tolchard sometimes, and I'm just like, I don't know what I could have done to catch them at a certain point. Because for the longest time, I was really far ahead of like Henry, right? You know, like I think I was like 7-0 against Henry before he won the national championship. And I think at that point, which was his junior year, not his senior year, he was just better than me, and there was nothing I could do to catch him. Like no matter how much I thought about debate, there was just something he understood that I didn't. Like I felt like I wanted to interview Tom Cady just to see like, dude, how is it, like what is happening in your head that even allows this to make sense? I was blown away judging him. I was blown away as a competitor. I just had so much respect for the dudes. And it's like, I don't want to tell people like just work more hours, because like there's a point of diminishing returns, and there's a ceiling. There just is. There's just a ceiling during your career at least, because you don't have enough time. Like I think I've gotten a lot better since I've become a judge, but your career is only this long. And it's the same as it is with other disciplines. Like, I don't know the exact dates of the NPTE, but let's say March 16th, if you're not the best debater in the country, you are not winning a national championship. It doesn't matter if March 17th you suddenly understand debate. It doesn't matter if the next year you understand debate. You have a limited window. And so, like what Sasan said, you have to decide the degree of success you want. If you want to break it every tournament, I think you can do that pretty easily, putting in maximum 5 hours a week in practice. I think that's more than enough. My students right now put in significantly less than that, I would say, and they've done great at the tournaments they've gone to so far, regardless of the level, whatever it is, blah 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 blah. Right? I think they haven't lost a prelim yet this year, and they could be doing much better. They're nowhere near where I want them to be. They're nowhere near what I consider to be like excellent competitors yet, though they're coming along and they have great mindsets and they're willing to do the work. But there's just no actual answer other than enough. And enough tends to be more than the other person.
When
Sorry
people
for dragging that out so long.
no, that's okay. Let me add an addendum to that. When people talk about like a format of debate being good or format of being bad or like easy or hard, I think what they're really talking about is how many competitors are close to that skill cap, like are working at the level where like the amount of work no longer makes the difference. And I would say at the very bottom of that, at the very top, obviously always policy. I mean, policy just has the most it's the most serious debaters. It's just the most insane shit you see people do for debate is all in policy. At the very bottom is like spar debate, where I don't think there's anyone out there.
Like IPDA, for those of you who don't know what
IPDA, I would put a little above it, right? I think there's people out there seriously wanting to be the best IPDA debater in the country. Spar debate is like for elementary schoolers who just like are learning debate, right? Nobody's like actively. If you want to be the best spar debater in the country, you can be. If you want to be the best policy debater in the country, that's going to be really, really tough. I would put public forum on kind of the lower end of that. I think public forum has few enough people who are practicing effectively and are getting coached by people who know what they're talking about, that anyone who's seriously committed and is coachable and is getting coached by the right person has a good shot at making, let's say, SEMs at the national level. And maybe the top team is just one of those uncatchable beasts that is going to be really hard to beat. But I'm ready to do the next question, but your whole setup went dim. I don't know what happened.
Oh, it's just I think the light behind me. I'll turn this on.
Oh, there you go. Cool. This question is from the Lord of the Rings theorist. I have some theories myself. Been watching all those movies with the commentary, the extended editions with the commentary, and it's just a tremendous waste of time. But it's great. Says a lot of really nice things to start, but here's the question. I notice the main point you stress about in PF is just knowing your case and being able to collapse to one specific thing and winning off of that. However, from your videos, it seems that you should start focusing on one point in the rebuttal speech. My fear with that is just, what if your opponent hard blocks that impact or makes it a wash? If you start only trying to win on one point that early and the opponent puts evidence against it, wouldn't it just be a wash to the judge? What I'm doing in my cases right now is I plan on extending 3 impacts in rebuttal, then depending on how the opponent responds, collapse on one that the judge was either dropped or answered poorly, weighed in summary, and final focus. So I'm setting up early weighing, presenting options I could weigh on, but I'm not deciding 100% what the focus should be in that rebuttal speech. Do you think this is a good way of doing it, or should I have one argument in mind that I want to win on and already weigh that specific blah, blah, blah in rebuttal?
Whenever in your debate format people are not allowed to make new arguments is when you should be collapsing.
Yes, which in public forum is not rebuttal.
Yeah, I don't believe so. Unless your second rebuttal, right?
In theory, yes, second rebuttal.
Sure.
So that's kind of what we meant, right? And you might have
in parley, so just for the record, yeah. In parley, the rebuttal is the final speech of the debate for both teams. Whereas
it's just a shitty
like
naming convention,
yeah,
right?
It's really weird.
So when we said rebuttal in some video, we might have been talking about the parley rebuttal, which is like the final focus, as opposed to the public forum rebuttal. With that said, here's a couple things. One, collapse in summary, but if you're the second speaking team, technically you can collapse in that rebuttal because your opponent doesn't have an ability to come up and wash out your argument like you're saying. And that is just one of the countless reasons why being able to go second in public forum is
See
just
this argument I was having the other day on this?
absurdly broken. It's
Oh,
absurd, and
dude.
it's just that the
I
teams
couldn't
aren't.
believe this. Dude, I was losing my mind. This kid was talking about like tournaments that don't allow flips for sides and for speaking order. Like they're all bullshit. They're all bullshit.
So
'Cause of this.
what I real quick, because we're going on a tangent.
Bro,
What I
yeah,
recommend everyone does is they're archived somewhere on the internet. I recommend everyone goes and reads the articles from Rostrum magazine when they were creating and advocating for public forum debate, and just read what they were trying to accomplish and why they set up the format the way they did, and you will see that public forum debate is either a tremendous failure or a tremendous success based on kind of like which goal you're looking at, but it just was not made. It was made specifically to not be done as a serious debate event where people cared about strategy and like the metagame and so on. And so it is not surprising that it's really, really badly built and really easy to take advantage of if you know what you're doing. The other thing that I'll just add quickly to your question is when you have enough round vision, you kind of can guess which argument won't be responded to well. And I don't have that in public forum, but in Parley, for example, if you are the affirmative and you have two advantages, your uniqueness 3 on advantage 2 can be whatever you want it to be, and the other side is just not going to respond because they're going to have two off-case positions, either a T and a DA, T, DA counterplan, DA1, DA2, T, DA, DA1, DA2. And then they're going to go on case, so they're going to answer advantage 1. They're going to take a little bit too long, and then they're going to get to advantage 2 with like 30 seconds left, and they're going to jump down to the impacts, so they answer your impacts, which means anything you're putting in the third uniqueness point of advantage 2, 70% of the time is getting conceded. And Paul and I know that, so we just prep and we just put stuff in there that
Literally every prep at some point we stop the kids and we go, we're writing an argument right now that does not fit where we're putting it, but it's going to end up being the most important argument in the round and they're going to drop it. So when they drop it, just go for it and you'll win.
Right, so there's things like that, right? If there's an argument that you just want them to drop, once you have enough round vision, you'll know, well, where do I put that argument? But in general, to answer your...
My teammate Dom it drove me fucking crazy when I was his coach. He literally had this setup where in his link, he had or in his uniqueness, he had a secret link. And in his second speech, he literally had a card that the tag of it was, "Uh-oh, you dropped the secret politics link." And I'm like, you can't do it that blatantly, my man.
Right, you can't do it that blatantly because you can't like label something as uniqueness and say actually it was a link.
Secretly.
But still, like, there's just things that... So to answer your question, loader theorist, yeah, no, you're correct. You don't want to be collapsing when your opponent has an opportunity to, like, deck out responses to the one thing you collapse at. You always collapse at the earliest possible time when they cannot make new arguments, so that every argument they're allowed to say in response to your position has already been made, but you are still able to add more things to that position. That's when you want to collapse. Tanya wants to know, what's your favorite color? Red.
Cerulean. Thanks, Tanya.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Zelda Master says, really nice things about the channel. My debate partner and I, especially recently, usually are consistently getting winning records at tournaments. However, we're always 1 or 2 seeds away from breaking. We are middle schoolers who are competing in JV. Usually because our speaker points are a little too low. For example, this weekend at Steven Stewart, my partner and I were the 17th seed that broke to octos with a 3-2 record, but in one round we got double 26s, therefore drastically lowering our speaker points. I think part of our problem is that we are both very wordy and end up speeding up in order to cover everything that we plan on extending. So what drills or practice techniques would you recommend in order to help with giving us more concise, less wordy speeches? Also, this is totally unrelated, but I'll ask an unrelated question in a second. Okay. I'll start with this one if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
There's several issues here. Uh, I'll get to your actual question, but I just want to touch on a few things, right? Like, if you're consistently going 3-2 and not breaking on speaker points, the bigger issue is not the speaker points; it's that you're going 3-2. If you're going if you're going 4-1 or 5-0, the speaker points won't matter, right? And ultimately, it's more productive to focus on those wins. Secondly, I think a lot of people exist at this like threshold right before they're consistently breaking, and it's a very frustrating place for debaters to be. And a lot of the posts you see on the debate subreddit are like, I'm right at this threshold. So here's I want to say a couple things about that, like being stuck right before breaking. And that's, first of all, like, breaking consistently isn't some sort of like magic prize in its own. Like, it's better, right? But if you were the 17th seed and being the 16th seed gets you into elims, all that means is you're hitting the 1 seed and losing in the first elim, right? It's not really that good a path into succeeding, right? Because if you're the bottom seed in elims, you have the hardest time, and you're not gonna improve by being the 16th seed and then learning how to beat the 1 seed. You're going to improve by trying to be a higher seed, being the 14th seed and hitting the 4 seed or whatever. I didn't do the math on that one. So ultimately, you're trying to get a better seeding. You're not trying to go from 17 to 16, because that's not really going to help you. You're trying to go from like 17 to 11, and then you really have a shot at like getting significantly farther. With that also said, with you having to speed up, right? That's time mismanagement, and also not having a clear script. One of the things that I tell our parley debaters is that you need to like know how many arguments you're going to talk about in the speech, know how much time you have, and then know how much time you're allocating to each one. Because when you spend 3 minutes on the first argument, it's too late to fix it. You can't, like, speeding up and trying to hit everything else isn't going to matter. You need to have a time limit in mind that I'm going to talk about this argument for a minute and a half tops, and then once you hit that, you move on, even if you're not done talking about that argument, because the other stuff you allotted time for are important, and if they weren't, you shouldn't allot time for them. So a lot of things there. But Paul, what did you want to add? And what either directly about like kind of what I was talking about, or in answer to the question, what are some drills they can do to improve their speaker points?
Okay, so you hit on the right thing, right? I had this discussion with a student before, and it was just like, I've had a number of students who complain about their speaker points. And like, not, they're like, oh, like my partner gets more speaker points than me, or if it's like a solo event, they're like, oh, I don't get speaker points for whatever reason, right? And none of that matters if you go undefeated. Like, literally none of that matters. You will still be the top seed of the tournament,
and you'll be the top speaker.
Well, what I was gonna say is that I was gonna say there's instances where that is not the case, right? Where the second best seed or whatever will be ahead. If you're an LD, you'll be top speaker essentially. But in parley or whatever, because there's 2 and blah 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 whatever, right? But let them take their top speaker trophy home, and you can win the tournament.
But all I meant, really, not to totally throw you off track, is that if you are undefeated and no one else is, right, then you would need low point wins, right? Like, people, and that's really rare, right? Like, the low point win happens when you're just a jerk, right? Don't be a jerk and win. You'll get top speaker.
Yeah, so number one is you just want to focus on being better at debate. I also think just being better at debate increases your speaker points, right? Unless you're a jerk. With that said, it sounds like the problem here, because you're talking about PF, is your case writing rather than your speaking, right? Like, make your cases shorter. Put a word limit on it. If you know you're talking too much, then make it more concise. Get someone else's eyes on it to cut words from it and stuff like that, right? That's just a thing you have to. One of the things I always did, no matter how good I got, is I would cut positions or cases for my students or for myself or whatever, and then I would show Dom or I'd show Dallas or I'd show Ravi, and I'd be like, hey, can you look at this? Can you just cut anything you think is garbage? And sometimes they'd cut stuff that I thought mattered, but I'd be like, really, you think I should cut that? And like, I don't think it gets you anything. And I'd be like, okay, cool, trust it, right? So that sounds like a problem. In terms of being concise, the best drill
Hold on, real
is
quick. And the reason people in public forum, by and large, can't do that is because
they don't disclose.
No, you're all finishing your cases like the day before
2
the
days
tournament. Like,
that's fair.
You need to prepare. You need to finish it like a week before so that you can edit. At least a week before.
There was one morning when NCFA, which is like our regional championship, was held at Pacific, which is where I coach and all that stuff. You should know that probably. One night I just couldn't sleep, so I just cut a bunch of stuff, and it was like 4 a.m. when I finished, and I texted Ravi and Dom, and I said, the second you wake up, I need you to start reading this, and when you get to school, meet me in this room, we're going to run it through it. And I literally, this is when I was their coach, and I just had them reading through it, and I timed it, and I was listening, and I was like, okay, we're good now. But if they didn't do it in the time I wanted them to, or in the way I wanted, I was like, nope, we're not reading, it doesn't matter, go back to the old stuff, it's fine, right? Like, you need to be confident of those kinds of things. Drill. You want to do compressions and insertions. You need to do the drill where you start off giving a speech. That's like a perfect speech, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, however long. Maybe it takes 10 minutes because it's public forum, right? A 10-minute speech, whichever one. The rebuttal, the summary, blah, blah, blah. And say everything you want to say. But then you got to do it again.
Hold on. So let me just emphasize that, right? Like, what you want to do is, let's do like a speech redo, right? And it's, you got to give the whatever. You got to give the rebuttal. You got to give a summary. You do it once without a time limit or with an absurdly high time limit, 10 minutes, and you just get in every argument that you could possibly want to make. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so you get in every argument you possibly want to make, and then you think about it for a minute. You do a little like kind of review in your head, right? Because you don't flow your own speech or whatever. And you say, okay, now I'm going to do it again, but with a minute less or 2 minutes less. And you do that until you get under the amount of time you're hoping for. So if it's a 4-minute speech, the last one you do should be a 3-minute speech or 2-minute speech, whatever you want, right? But less time than you actually have, because what that forces you to do is identify which part of this doesn't actually matter, and then you just cut that.
Yeah.
It's also the drill I like for round vision, though round vision, like we've said, is really hard to teach with drills. It's the only one I can think of that I think does a pretty good job of it. But yeah, compressions and insertions, it's covered in our video. But yeah, first time, time yourself, but don't set a timer. Like, set a stopwatch. Whatever that ends up being, 14 minutes, 15 minutes, that's now the upper bound. You have to go lower each time.
Follow-up question. Also, this is totally unrelated, but you have a guitar amp in your background, and I have an acoustic electric guitar, so I was wondering if you have any recs for a good amp. And I feel like I know what yours is, but go ahead. So it depends on a lot of things. I asked him, you know, like, what kind of music are you interested in? And he said he's self-taught, about 3 or 4 months in, taking lessons for about a month, mostly interested in pop, jazz once they're good enough, maybe R&B, because he plays piano in a band that plays R&B. So the answer will depend on your, like, budget, largely, and like what you're trying to accomplish with it. Like, are you trying to use the amp to play shows, or are you just need a practice amp, right? But Paul, I feel like I know what your answer is.
I'm gonna bet you have no idea.
Okay, go ahead.
You don't spend nearly as much time.
I know nothing about gear. Okay, so
exactly.
let me just so in the background you see that, like, PV amp. Like, I did like a day of research and was like, sounds black metal, that's what I'll use. And then that guitar is $150 used guitar, which was worse technically than the guitar I already had, but it had everything I wanted and nothing I didn't, and now it's like my favorite guitar, and I'm never gonna buy any other equipment. I'm very, very low maintenance. I basically never buy gear. Paul has several guitars, several amps. I have one of his amps in my room. He just leaves.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So here's my thing. Number one is, I think you said it has an acoustic electric or an acoustic and an electric.
Acoustic hyphen electric.
Okay, that could make things a little weird. You might want an acoustic amp depending on what you're doing. But currently the two amps that are the best-selling, most popular practice and entry-level gigging amps are solid-state amps, right? They're not they don't have tubes, so they're cheaper. They're digital, which is the Boss Katana and the Fender, I believe it's called Mustang 40, I think is what it is.
Never
But
heard of either
basically,
of
they're
these.
modeling amplifiers. So here's my thing. Sasan has a modeling amplifier as well. I think initially you should get a modeling amplifier, right? And those are the two best ones on the market right now. Modeling amplifiers are amplifiers that mimic other amp sounds or the effects of, guitar effects, right? That have them built into it. I think that's a good way to start because one, they're really cheap. Two, they're fairly scalable. If you get a 50-watt one or a 100-watt one, that'll get super loud. And three, because you want to figure out what you like.
Yeah.
Sasan just found an amp that had a setting, and he only plays on this setting and this setting, right? His clean setting and his dirty setting on this exact pickup. When you're new, you don't know that. And so you want an amp that can give you a wide range of sounds so that you can figure out what you want. Yeah, myself, I ended up going away from amps completely, and I have like a PA kind of thing going and a Helix LT, which is a modeling thing. But initially, I would just get probably honestly the Katana. I have a Katana myself. I have a little one that's like this big for my office, and it's great amp, great sounds. Look it up. Look up Anderton's reviews of it on YouTube. They're fantastic, and I hope you enjoy guitar. It's pretty fun until you stop getting good.
I have gotten better at guitar in the last year than I did in probably the 8 years before that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brenna wants to know, what's a floating pick?
Did you? I'm good to answer this one.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm
Okay,
not gonna
cool.
answer it.
Okay, so Brenna, you know what a PIC is, which is a plan-inclusive counterplan, right? And so the negative does some portion of the aft, generally speaking, a significant portion of the aft. There's not a great bright line for it, right? A floating PIC is an advocacy that results in the affirmative. Now, it doesn't say it results in the affirmative. Like, they're never very clear. Their advocacy never is do the aft, but this a lot. Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's do the aft, but as a communist or whatever, right? Floating PIC. But usually it is they just say they do something super nebulous and vacuous or whatever, and then in the second half of the debate they go, ha, this was secretly a floating PIC, and so the aft happens. The way you get around that is usually either asking like, is this a floating PIC early on, or just asking the question, can the world of the alternative, usually because it's the criticism generally where this happens, result in the affirmative, right? And then that gets you away from it. But essentially it's when someone cheats and says that even though they didn't mention the aft at all, they also do the aft, and I guess just win with no warrant for why that's true most of the time. Great question, Brenna.
Jillian Zhu wants to know, what are some drills for practicing summary? I think the drill that we mentioned earlier is probably a good one.
Yeah, doing the summary with that drill. So doing the compression insertion drill. Let me think about the summary real quick. I'm trying to think if there's anything specific in my head. I think that less of a drill and more of a framework is what's important, right? I think that rebuttal type speeches, which sort of summary and final focus are in PF, it's kind of weird because they like split it a little bit in that sense. I think that you want to figure out your formula. You can give like the same template for every round, especially within a topic. Like on the topic, you should basically have your summary like written out of like, this is what we went for, blah, blah, blah. If we go for the, me and Sasan did this for the tab and dab. We literally had, if we go for this position, here's what you say, here's what I need you to extend, blah, 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 that kind of stuff, right? And so formulas, I think you just need to be able to be like, some people, because of Henry Tolcher being an absolute legend, do the like layers and preamps thing, right? Where they start off, here's the layers of the debate that we won, and then here's what they'll go for, right? Depending on if they're the not last speaking team. But yeah, just do the speech over and over again, and then figure out a framework for it. What are you going to do first? How long do you have to do that? What are you going to do last? Blah, 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 blah.
The other thing that I'll add is that regardless of the topic, there's only so many impacts that you're going to be going for in the end. Paul, if you had to like guess the number of impacts that we prep at a tournament, or like at all of our tournaments.
No more
So
than 5.
yeah, right. Like Paul and I go to parley tournaments in college, and we've been having a good year, and we'll be prepping both sides of 10 topics so far, and we've used 4 impacts maybe, and I imagine like by the end of the year we'll push that number to 6, 7 maybe. Like
Yeah, it's
really
like
5. There's 5 impacts that you're gonna talk about, right?
bad things from econ, different kinds of wars, like climate change type scenarios. And then we always like to have one that's more of a like systemic, whether dehum if you want to call it that, or intelligibility sometimes we call
Mm-hmm.
it, whatever it might be. Those are like the big 4 that like you're gonna make kind of your bread and
Yeah, and I would make
yeah.
poverty a separate one from
It,
econ.
yeah. And when I say econ scenarios, I definitely mean there's like poverty, and then there's starvation, and
Right,
then there's
right,
whatever.
right,
Much
right.
like with war, there's nuclear war versus resource war versus
Sure,
land
but
war
really
versus
they're just
proxy war,
those
whatever.
things, right? And one
They're
of
just
the
yeah,
points that you're wanting to start to make very clear in the summary is why your impact that you're going for is the most significant in the round. And there's no reason you can't write that out, right? Like, what is your story for why poverty is the most important impact in the round, or why the
and what
economy?
is your story for why magnitude matters more than probability?
Right. And these are
Like
things that
same,
not only can you write those ahead of time, but once you write them ahead of time, you can use them for any topic ever, right? Because regardless of what we're talking about leading into poverty, once we're talking about the poverty being bad doesn't change based on whether it was caused by compulsory voting or by Medicare for all or by, I don't know, the tax topic. What was that? Capital gains tax. Um, that's it for the questions on YouTube. Let's see our Reddit questions. Speaker 6 wants to know, how can I avoid feeling demotivated and sad about all of the tournaments being online?
let me know when you have the answer, Speaker 6. Um,
I
community.
I
That's
can,
my answer.
yeah. So one of the things that is making this a lot easier for me is that we are going to largely tournaments within our community, our debate community, which isn't just regional, right? It's like community colleges nationally are part of our debate community. Um, and I just already know a lot of those people, and there's a lot of friendly faces, and it's not just us as coaches. When we went to this Southern California tournament this past weekend, one of our returning debaters was like, "Oh, this judge is here, and this judge is here, and this competitor is here." And that'll just make it feel a lot better. Um, but that's going to be hard if you don't already have that community established, and it's going to be difficult if you're just starting out, right?
It's also going to be really hard if you're alone, right? Like
Yeah.
my kids, we have a Discord server. It's not the one we're on right now, but a different Discord server for like. Actually, it is the one we're on. What am I talking about? Anyway, sorry, it doesn't matter. We have a DBC Discord server where our speech kids are allowed, our debate kids are allowed, all that kind of stuff, and we're just all in there during the tournament when we're not in round, and so we're talking. And when we had downtime, I was like, "Does anyone want to play a game? I'll stream something. We'll play." Keep talking. Nobody explodes. We'll play Among Us, whatever.
Yeah.
And that like community at all levels matters. You need to talk to your team and build an environment where you just like spending time with each other. And then you need to be like building relationships where when you go to SoCal, you're stoked. I used to be so stoked at every tournament that I got to. I mean, I still would be, but they've mostly graduated. That I got to see Concordia. Like I love everyone on that team basically. I'm not trying to like single anyone out, but I just only know so many of them. But some of my best friends in the circuit were from that team. Same thing with Oregon. If I got to see Oregon, it was hugs all around back when that was allowed, and it was just great. Like,
And a lot of that will
and
translate online.
yeah.
But what I want to say in addition to that is, like, as a region, Northern California's like Speech and Debate Association came together and was like, what are some things we can do to foster community? And one of the things we ended up with was like a Northern California Discord, which is big. I know there's some different speech and debate discords, and you could try those. The thing is, if I'm being honest, that high school kids are kind of shitty as like
I'm
human
surprised
beings.
though, because when I
No,
checked
sorry.
the PF Discord in particular, I don't know, the official one, whatever, the one that like I think Serena Mao runs or whatever. I don't know, Smao they call her.
Yeah.
That one, every time I go on there and there's a tournament, it's just people being like, "Yeah, dude, you broke! Like, great, congrats, blah blah blah." And I'm like, that's pretty awesome. And then a lot of shit talking, but it's very supportive, which I enjoy.
Sure. But what I want to say is that like it's rarer that high school age kids have the perspective of like, let's foster a community. It's more common that they're like, I want to be in the in group, and once I am, I want to shit on people who are not in the in group as much as possible. Which is whatever. It's you're a mammal that is growing. That's just what growing mammals do. But yeah, those are some options, and always try to talk to people at tournaments and make friends with your competitors, and that will help. The last
if you're not making friends, oof.
Yeah, no, it's rough, and that's not online or in person. Like it's the same. Like this activity is really, really, really rough if you're not making friends doing it. If you're not going against people who you already know in rounds, and you're like, oh wow, really cool to hit you. If you're not seeing the same judge again and having something to say to them, right? Like, I'll go to judge a debate round, and if the competitors are new, this is college, right? So it's smaller. If the competitors are new, I'll make a bunch of jokes. I'll make new friends. If they're returning competitors, like we'll talk, we'll kind of chat a little bit before the round and kind of like catch up, and it just makes the whole activity a lot less torturous for everybody involved. What were you gonna say?
I forgot to tell you this. This weekend I judged some round where like in like the middle of it, like some theory thing came up, I think, or whatever, right? And like when they got to the discussion about like judge intervention or whatever, they like, but judge intervention is bad or whatever, right? They're like, look, you're a really experienced and well-known like judge. Like, you know that this is bad, and I had to try so hard not to laugh. I was like, no one thinks I'm a great judge.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had debaters go like, sorry Sasan, we're going for the K. Alright, do what you gotta do. What is your opinion on progressive arguments in PF?
I don't like the term progressive arguments.
I agree. I think progressive arguments is a catch-all for things that I think are very different.
Yes.
Go on.
So, dude, actually, I gotta pull the. Go ahead, can you start talking about? I'm gonna pull something up real quick.
Okay, well, the first thing is that I think progressive arguments came from other formats of debate, and that's not the problem, right? The problem isn't like this came from policy and it's turning everything into policy, which isn't true. And regardless, the first issue is like, is the format of public forum designed to be able to generate good, fair clash on progressive arguments? And the answer is, well, no, it was not designed with any of that in mind. It was designed explicitly with that not in mind. But can it be adjusted, and can norms be developed that make that possible? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
So this is potentially boring. I'm going to read 3 short paragraphs from a judge's philosophy. And this judge I consider to be one of the smartest, if not the smartest people that I knew during my time in debate. They're like super smart. They are way smarter than me. They have great opinions. They helped me a lot during my career. And they recently changed their judge philosophy. And I almost cried when I read it because I was like, they agree. Finally, the smart people like really, and just.
I would have thought you were talking about me if you didn't say 3 paragraphs in a judging philosophy, and I was like, well, that's not me.
So real quick, this is a person who had incredible success, right? Great. Anyway, here we go. Overview. My position for years has been that NPDA debate should be a technical exercise in which the content of an argument is largely insignificant. I have generally been of the opinion that the role of the judge is to bracket out their own views and preferences and to vote based on a technical execution of a strategy, regardless of the pedagogical or ethical validity of said strategy. I no longer believe this, and I'm adapting my judging paradigm accordingly. I believe that NPDA debate is a unique format that has many benefits which cannot be derived from other formats of debate, and I believe the preservation of NPDA as an event should be a central goal for all participants in the activity. NPDA provides scholarship opportunities, travel opportunities, and intensive pedagogical development that many students might otherwise not have access to. Debate is not just a hobby we participate in on the weekends, it is a gateway into academia, politics, and long-standing community. My concern is that I believe the proliferation of certain pedagogically vacuous trends within the NPDA constitute an existential threat to the continued existence of the event, and I feel that personally being a responsible judge with a commitment to the activity and community means no longer facilitating the spread of these trends. My philosophy has changed in order to account for shifting understanding of what it means to be a good judge. That's all I wanted to read. They have a bunch of stuff after that, but that
So,
is how I feel about progressive arguments. To answer your question,
first of all, pedagogy and pedagogical refers to, like, is a word for when something relates to learning.
philosophy of education and learning.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's certain arguments that what to touch on that, I think there's certain arguments that the public forum community thinks are progressive, which are like absurdly like normal to me, right? Like a counter plan. Like a counter plan isn't like progressive to me, right? And that's kind of what I meant when I was saying that I think PF uses progressive as a catch-all term for things that don't really have any relation to each other. I don't think a counterplan and an AFK are in any way in the same category of things. With that said, I think, I don't know, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough, I think, for myself and for Paul, because we like competition and we like games. And debate is a game, but debate isn't just a game, right? Like, debate is also all of those things that Paul mentioned, and we don't think that those things should be sacrificed in favor of the game aspects of debate. With that said, like, when we think about how to counter progressive arguments in debate, our strategy is never, our discussions never centered around, well, we gotta go to some sort of meeting and say that we're not allowed to do this anymore. And it's never centered around, like, we need to ostracize these teams from the community because they did this, or not invite them to our tournaments. Like, we hosted a tournament last year and we had by far the most progressive team in our region, like, show up, and it was great. We're interested in how do we actually defend what we believe, right? If you have a belief that something is good for debate and something else isn't, and you believe in that opinion and you can justify it, then there's no real reason why you can't defend it in a debate round. Now, the only time when that's not really, like, appropriate is when we're talking about, like, novice rounds and stuff like that, right? Like, I think, like, I've voted on K's before in open parley rounds, or, you know, open parley rounds, and I've been like, look, I don't like this critique, I don't believe it works, I don't think it happens, but you need to do more than to just say, yeah, but I don't like K's in response to it, right? You need to engage with people's ideas, especially when the biggest defense of critiques is we need to do this because as this group of people refuse to engage with our ideas, and they will only allow us to have a voice in the way that they deem valuable, which is fucked up and it sucks. And I think that's a legitimate reason to challenge the way something is being done, right? And I think any serious debater who wants to answer progressive arguments needs a well thought out, serious answer to those questions rather than to just hand wave it and say, yeah, but rules are good, or that should be against the rules, right? Because these issues are real. I think I can justify my answer to them, but you need to be able to justify yours, and I hold you to that. Where I don't think that's appropriate is when I'm watching a novice round and one novice team is given a K to read and they clearly don't understand it, but they're just saying it, and the other team has not even heard that a K is possible, and then, you know, they maybe lose or they win, or I don't know. Either way, it's just no education is getting out of that round. No one is leaving that round more in love with the activity than before they walked in. It's just a shame, right? It just sucks that people kind of see these progressive arguments as easy wins. And that's the thing. If I thought everyone was running progressive arguments in good faith, then it would be an entirely different thing. But I think a lot of people are running progressive arguments in bad faith because they're strategic in a debate round. And I think that's what's hurting the debate community. Because I think I'm going to touch on what you're about to say, but let me finish real quick. And I think it's because a lot of the people who are doing these progressive arguments like aren't going to be in the community long term. So they're just going to get their wins and they're going to leave. And they don't really care like what this does to the activity. I want the activity to be inclusive and to think critically about things. But there's really no way of me saying like, oh, here's who is doing this in good faith, here's who's not doing it in good faith, and how can I? It's a complicated thing, but my opinion of progressive arguments in PF is that I think it's really shitty when people make arguments that are progressive in bad faith just to win a debate round. But Paul?
For me, it doesn't even have things to do with bad faith. It's just, I understand that it's a game or whatever, but I think that there are just a lot of things that are broken in the game and that are not going to be fixed in a patch. No one's going to patch or hotfix whatever, right? Or amend the format to resolve these issues because, like, the convicts are running the asylum or whatever. And, like, there's just certain things, like MG theory and Parley is stupid broken. It is stupid broken to be able to, in the MG, read multiple new sheets in the debate that any one of them, if you win, will win you the debate, and that you get the first and last word on, and that they only get one chance to respond to with new arguments. Like, it's insane. And the thing is, MG theory, like Kondo's, you know, whatever. Like Kondo, obviously, I'm a fan of, and I think that makes sense, right? But like, and that person's judging philosophy actually left mentions specific things, right? If you're reading a spec of anything but funding, enforcement, or actor, I don't want to hear that shit. I'm not voting for it. I don't care. Like, I'm not voting for it. Don't care. Not happening. Right? If you're reading theory positions where the violation is derived from the behavior of competitors rather than the argument, i.e., the affirmative must read their plan text in 2 minutes, within 2 minutes of starting their speech. And then the problem is, this is actually a really important distinction. Me and Sasan's experience with progressive argumentation is very different. And I think that for Sasan, when he says progressive argumentation, a lot of the time he's thinking about like criticisms or like postmodern criticisms or whatever, right? Being done in bad faith. For me, it's almost always theory because I had to debate the K a lot, and it's just basically accepted at this point that that's just a thing that people get to do. And so I think there's a lot of these like stupid theory positions that Sasan hasn't even seen that would blow his mind as to how stupid they are, and that judges consistently vote on them.
Let's also be clear that I haven't seen those positions because I have no interest in going to tournaments that like cater to that. Occasionally I see people like I remember the first time I judged around and somebody ran like a tricks argument with like a heap of sand will never not be.
And that was another example. If you're reading sand, like, what are we doing, kid?
Yeah.
What are we doing? Like, stuff I just think it's so, and like you all have your sand mafia thing or whatever the hell it was you were doing, just like this. You can win. This is the problem. Like, maybe I'm just dumb, right? Because generally I'm an incredibly accomplishment oriented person, right? If you want a tournament, I think that's legit. If you were a national champion, that's super legit. There's no argument that you're good. But if you're winning debates on just random BS, and I'm trying not to swear because that middle schooler asked a question, like if you're winning debates because you read sand and how there's complex predicates, I think you're dumb and I don't think you're good at debate, and I think that you had bad judges. I think you're a bad person. I'm going to go that far. I think you are a bad person who was wasting the time and destroying an activity that matters a lot to a lot of people and, like this judge says, provides a ton of opportunities. And I think that's stupid. Like, that's just me. I'm probably not going to judge any of you ever, but like, if I do, go ahead and read it.
Is this judge
Like,
that
you
you're
do
talking
you.
about with the philosophy? Is that the guy who beat me in my last parlay round?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought it was him.
No.
I don't know this guy.
No, you don't know this person.
Yeah. Well, I like the.
But yeah, it blows my mind, dude.
One last question. How to approach the national circuit from a new school in a state that is more traditional when it comes to debate? I can take this and then you can, or why don't you start?
Number one depends on the event.
Yeah.
So like, okay, it's a goals question again. So it sounds like the goal
That's
is
exactly
to do
what
well.
I was gonna start
Yeah,
talking
it
about.
sounds like the goal is to do well in the national circuit. I think you have to decide, right? It's possible to be good in your regional A circuit and to be good on the national circuit. That's something me and Dallas were really focused on, right? But I think if we had just focused on the national circuit, we probably would have been 10, maximum 10% better, whatever,
Yeah.
right? But with that said, I think part one is just being seen on the national circuit and seeing the national circuit, right? You want people to know who you are because you're around. This is something Steve heavily believed in, right? Was like, you have to make appearances. Like, you got to be at these places so that judges know you're there and know it's okay to vote for you and whatever. And it just familiarizes you with what's happening. It also helps you build relationships where, like, you can hit up whoever, like, oh, this cool debater or that really good debater, and be like, hey, so, like, can you help me with this, that kind of stuff. And I think that's a big part of it. But just be aware that it's very likely that success on the national circuit for you will trade off, at least initially, with success in your regional area. Because the things that those like disparate I don't want to say disparate activities because it's the same activity technically, but like those different judging populations or circuits, whatever, probably value different things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily read the question as like I want to be a national circuit debater, but I'm in a traditional region. So my answer is a little bit more. The next video I was gonna make was gonna be all about how to be goal oriented and the importance of that in a season. Paul and I are this year for the first time coaching together on the same team. That's it's really exciting. We're doing really well. But what we're in the phase of trying to do right now is decide what are our goals as a team, like as a school, and what are our goals for our individual debate teams or individual debaters, or what are their goals for themselves and how are we helping them meet that. And the first thing that you need if you're starting out in debate, or even if you're starting out a year and you're an incredibly accomplished or experienced person, is you need specific goals. And if you're watching this video, your goals are too vague. Like, I just...
There's the one thing I want to note here that I think, because I don't know if you're going to say this or not,
Yeah.
you need goals which are measurable in
Right.
their progress towards them. So, sorry,
Right.
go ahead.
And so, like, if you're not Robert Hawkins, your goals are too vague. You could be a director of forensics of a team in our region, and I know that your goals are too vague. You don't have, like, this is the exact placement at the exact tournament that I am going to get. That's where our school is at, right? Like, we're like, okay, we are going to enter this tournament in April in this school size, which means we need to bring this many competitors. And once we know that many competitors, we need to examine, okay, what does it take to win this tournament? it takes having these events. Okay, we need to get these events up throughout the year. But not only does it take doing these events, but you need to have this sort of style. And how do we develop that style? Well, we need to go to these tournaments that will allow us to see the people doing well in that style and give the students the experience. We're going to go to this other super intense tournament at this month so that people can see those really good competitors and get motivated and have an idea for what their goals should be. And then we're going to take them to these other tournaments so we can measure how well they're doing in this specific thing, right? And if you don't know what your ultimate end goal is, then you have no idea what to do earlier in the season. A lot of people just sort of go to whatever tournament is available, do as well as they can, and then they'll be like, I made it, I qualified for nationals, and then go to nationals, and then they get whatever position they get, or they don't qualify to nationals, and then they're like, okay, well, that was fun, right? But my advice for a small school is decide what you're trying to do. Like, set a goal. Doesn't matter what that goal is, set a goal and make it a difficult goal. And then figure out how people accomplish that goal, how people have done it before, what it takes. And then you develop your strategy for getting there. And in the process of just doing that, you will learn basically everything you need to learn about forensics. Like, it'll just take care of itself, right? But by nature of, like, even having a specific goal requires so much an understanding of what speech and debate is that by the time you have a goal, you're already most of the way there to being good at the activity. And then once you figure out how people reach those goals, you're 90% of the way there. And the rest of it's just figuring out how to bridge the gap between what it takes and what you have. And the last, like, 3% is getting creative about what you can do to accomplish that goal that no one has done before. And that's been our model for success. When Paul and I were on the team, we were decent debaters, but DVC as a school was not a nationally known team.
We didn't even go to nationals the 2 years I competed for DVC.
Yeah, and you don't need to qual for those nationals. We just didn't go because they were out of state, and we didn't want to, like, our coach didn't want to spend the money or time, more likely, to take us out of the state. And what would happen is every year we'd go to, and I see it still with a million schools, they go to the state tournament and they do okay. Like, maybe one team will break in one event and then they'll feel really happy and they'll go home. And that's genuinely great. Like, I love that. I have a lot of nostalgia for that. That is the type of team that I was on when I was a competitor, where I happened to do well in my event, but it wasn't really a team that was focused around that. And we just hung out and we just talked shit about the other teams and we had this great social activity. And I would never knock that. But where we are now as a team is we have goals, and it sucks to see these competitors from these other schools who really want to do well, but they just haven't been prepared for it. Like, we'll go to our national tournament, which is not a super progressive tournament, and okay, so every year, just to give you one example, every year our state championship and our national championship in Parley, they have in the Constitution guaranteed they have 2 policy type resolutions, 2 value type resolutions, and 2 metaphor type resolutions, which don't worry what those are if you don't know. But every year I will see people from community colleges that I know that have talented coaches go to that tournament and never have talked to their students about either value rounds or metaphor rounds. And they just send them in going like, just do policy stuff. And no adaptation to the judging pool ever crosses their mind. No, like, maybe we should learn what a value round is ever crosses their mind. And they'll do badly. And the students will feel really shitty. And the coaches will feel really shitty. And then that's the end of their year. Like, they're doing so maybe based on the coach's background or based on the student's interest. Like, they will have this perception of, yeah, we want to do really progressive, really technical debate. but then they don't actually go to the tournaments that foster, that like reward that approach to debate. They go to these other non-progressive tournaments, and then they're like, wow, we did really badly. Like, if your goal is to be progressive, like, maybe like this tournament shouldn't be a part of that goal. But if this is the tournament you're going to and you care about doing well, you should probably adapt to it more and spend more of your year trying to get ready for it, right? And what's part of making this year difficult is we have our usual every year goal of winning state and nationals on the community college circuit, but we also have some returning debaters that are doing really, really well and could probably like make a decent run at the 4-year circuit. And we have to figure out how to balance getting ready for both of those things. Do we send them to a super progressive technical tournament and then have them go down that route at the risk of them maybe doing poorly at the state nationals and kind of compromising our school-wide goals of doing well at that tournament? Can we balance them doing both? And that, literally, I have every weekend of the year in a spreadsheet what tournaments are available for us to go to and what our goals would be for that tournament and what they how they help us reach further goals and what is our benchmark. Like, do we, like, let's say last year, right? Like, I want my novice teams to win the UOP tournament, and I want the open teams to make it to quarters at this tournament, so that the next month when we go to our own tournament, I want us to get to the semis in this and to once again win novice, and then that team will move into open. And that, like, you need specific goals, and if you can figure out what those goals are and figure out how to get them, the actual doing part is super easy. Actually, like, doing the work to achieve the goal, once you know what your goal is and know what work needs to be done, is super, super easy. We as a school don't work significantly harder than other schools competing at state and nationals, but we just better understand what we're trying to do and how to accomplish it with the amount of work that we're going to put in. That was a super long rant. I'm sorry. Paul, you got something?
I don't remember what the question was. I think it was something about national circuits.
What do you do? What do I do if I'm a small school and I want to do traditional?
I talked about it.
So, do you want to be a traditional debater? What goal what tournament are you trying to win? Right? Who does well at those tournaments? What's different about how they debate and other people, and what's different about how they debate and how you debate? What other tournaments do they go to? Can you go to those tournaments? Can you, like, what, set goals?
And online era is uniquely, like, good for this,
which is something that I wanted to talk about. You can
go to whatever tournament you want to go to, and so it's not hard to go to the tournaments you care about.
That's something I wanted to talk about when the person was like, how do you stay cheered up? I forgot to mention it, but that's the other positive of the online year, right? Is that you could go to any tournament anywhere in theory. And so instead of doing that willy-nilly and without a specific goal in mind, it's the best opportunity any debaters will ever have to specifically mold their year down to, like, really finite details, because even in our regular, like, year where we're making all these goals and we're trying to do it, we still have to accomplish that on a travel budget, which is really small, especially when you're traveling 20 people, right? And so we're in Northern California and we're in Southern California. That's why we had to host our own tournament. Our college team hosts its own tournament now because we literally couldn't go to the competitions that included the schools we wanted to compete against. So we made a tournament specifically with the goal of getting those teams to come to us. And then, like, what do we have to do to get Bradley University to come to our, well, we have to have this many rounds of this and have this quality. And that's having goals and thinking about what you have and what you're trying to accomplish and how those goals get accomplished is everything. It's everything. And now I don't have to make that video because I just said every thought I had on the issue.
Another one. I think we gotta wrap up here because I gotta do
we
some
have to
stuff for
teach our
class.
college class.
Yeah, we have to teach an actual thing they kind of pay one of us for.
Yeah.
So
Guess which?
yeah, guess which? So yeah, thanks so much for asking questions. Hopefully we'll do this again in the future. And also,
And
I mean, like,
if we
even
do, if we do this again in the future, it would be in answer to questions that are in the comments here. So feel free to leave comments here for us to.
I was also going to say, for those of you who know our Reddit usernames, feel free to also reach out there. Like Sasan said, like, people have reached out to us before. We're usually pretty good about responding to people who ask.
I spend an absurd amount of time just answering random people's questions on Reddit. It's my way of like kind of checking the news but not getting lost in it. I'll go on Reddit, I'll like check what's going on, and then I'll be like, oh, let me check some debate stuff instead so I don't kill myself. Okay.
I'll talk to you, man.
Yep.
Have a good one. Bye, y'all.
Bye.